And welcome back. My next guest is Jeremy Honey, a U.S. Army Vietnam War veteran. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'm delighted to have you on the program. And first, before we begin, I want to thank you for your service to our country. You were wounded in service to our country, and I want to thank you for that service to the military and your service in Vietnam. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Jeremy, as you know, I always want to have a veteran on our program to kind of talk about their service and then can also highlight some of the things that they're involved with within the veterans groups that they may be involved with. So maybe you could just give our viewers a little thumbnail sketch of who you are, where you were born and raised. And
well, I'm a lifelong resident of Rockland County, lived in the same house for 71 years, a family home. Love Rockland County. I joined the Army, and I became an engineer, and I was assigned to Vietnam.
When did you get into the Army?
I went in 1968.
And how old were you?
I was 20 when I came in.
20, okay.
Yeah. I'd been to some college first, and then I entered the Army to the engineers. I enlisted, and I went to Vietnam. Where I was assigned actually as a combat engineer to what they call a tropospheric scatter communications company. We had sites on all of the mountaintops through the Central Highlands. So my job was physical security. I set up the physical security for all these sites. I had a team, and I was in charge. Went from Entree Island in the South China Sea all the way to Bam Mae Thuot, which was near the Cambodian border. And then when President Nixon ordered troops into Cambodia to break the enemy supply lines, which was a real problem, I was involved in that. So I served Vietnam and Cambodia.
Okay.
I also served for 3 years with the mechanized infantry on the East-West German border, the Cold War. Mm-hmm. We guarded the wall, so to speak. And I've had many special assignments throughout the continental United States. I've had 5 military occupational specialties while I was in. And in the later years, I spent training actually officers and non-commissioned officers.
Right.
But it had a very, very fine service. When you said I was wounded, actually, I'm 100% service-connected veteran, and by the VA they consider me 200% connected. But my injuries were actually internal from exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam. I don't know if you're familiar with Agent Orange. Agent Orange was the predominant chemical was dioxin. Horribly harmful chemical. And they sprayed it to defoliate the jungles where the enemy had cover and concealment. So being as I traveled as extensively as I did through Vietnam, I got quite a snootful of Agent Orange. And Agent Orange attacks the chromosomal structure of the body. It got in the water supply, when you filled your canteens, it got in the food supply, and if you ate anything from the field, and the air. So what dioxin actually does is it devastates the internal organs, which has been my problem. And I have diabetes, which is one of the presumptive diseases. I've lost most of both feet. Mm-hmm. Many of my comrades have died from serious, unusual cancers and things associated to that.
Right, and I know that Howard Golden, who's a Vietnam veteran,
very good friend of mine,
wonderful man and a friend of mine as well, just a former police chief in Spring Valley, and he's organized some trips back to Vietnam. And,
yes, he has.
And he lost his son as a complicating factor with Agent Orange as well, due to the exposure. So you're absolutely right. It's a horrible side effect of the war that's claimed far more lives after the war ended than it did during the war itself, probably. But again, you carry the after effects of that. That's a challenge and a struggle. But you carry yourself with grace and dignity, and really an example for a lot of your fellow vets as to, when life, kind of, hands you something that's problematic.
Right.
You can, the old saying, you can throw the towel in, but all you have to do is bend over and pick it.
Keep going.
Yeah. Or if you throw the towel in, you just end up having to bend over and pick it back up. Anyway.
Absolutely right. That's my philosophy, is just to keep going and do. My primary job now, of course, I'm in dialysis also with the VA, but my primary mission, so to speak now, is to work for veterans.
Right.
I am the Rockland County Commander of the Disabled American Veterans, and I also am the representative, and I coordinate the Veterans Coordinating Council in Rockland, which is a combination of all the nationally certified veterans organizations. So I work predominantly with veterans.
So,
So
let's just two quick questions about your service in the military. So, you were 12 years on active duty.
yes.
And so you had some really diverse assignments: Vietnam, combat, Cambodia, combat support. Then eventually you were over during the height of the Cold War. After the war, over in Germany, which that must have been, that had its own different types of stresses.
Absolutely,
as well.
yes.
So maybe you could just speak a little bit, because we don't often have vets that have had that diverse type experience. So you saw combat, or you served in a theater of war, but you served in the Cold War in Germany. Contrast the two experiences for us.
Well, actually, in Vietnam, of course, the enemy was mostly unseen, unless there was the Viet Cong. They were guerrilla fighters. You couldn't tell. During the day they were Vietnamese, and during the night they were enemy. There was also what they called the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, which were trained, China trained and equipped and uniformed and that. And I have had experience with both. Being on the mountaintops where I had to set up the physical security, which was the bunker emplacements, the towers, and concertina wire and Claymore anti-personnel mines all around the mountains, so that they couldn't infiltrate these highly sensitive sites. Now in Germany, it was different, because on the East-West German border, of course, there was the demilitarized zone. But we could look over to the East German side, and the whole town, the whole village, was being trained. Every man, woman, and child carried a gun, marched, did ordered drills, and we could actually watch that from our site there.
Wow.
So they were prepared at any time for the call to, they'd be the invaders.
Wow. That's just a very, very, very different experience. How long were you in Germany for?
I was in Germany for a little over 3 years.
Wow. So very different experience from
yeah.
more of a tropic environment to Central Europe.
And I've had some special assignments in continental United States. I was assigned to West Point, assigned to Walter Reed Army Medical Center, Fort Meade, Maryland, and being an instructor of these special subjects for officers and senior NCOs, I traveled TDY, temporary duty assignments, all over the country. So I was spread out.
Wow. Wow. So let's talk a little bit just about some of the veterans groups that you're involved with in the minute or two that we have left. You're a member of the Vietnam Veterans Association?
Yes, I am.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about the efforts that the Vietnam Veterans Association does, particularly with the watch fires. Could you speak to that?
Yes. Well, the watch fires were actually started by General George Washington, and they were to signify across the river between Rockland County and Westchester County, and there were different sites. The Vietnam veterans took that up and they continued this. They have 4 sites in Rockland County: Piermont, Gene Levy Park, Bowline,
And Clausland.
and Clausland Mountain, right. And on Memorial Day, they put up huge bonfires which last 24 hours throughout that period in recognition. And at that time, they also ceremoniously burn the American flag in honor.
Mm-hmm.
So it's used for that as well.
Right. So people can retire there if you have tattered and
Yes,
torn
exactly.
and old American flags. People don't know what to do with those. The proper way to dispose of them, could be with a ceremony at a fire.
Right. They can get them to, for instance, my American Legion post is Kearsing and Edwards in Pomona, and they have a mailbox outside that you can put these flags in, and they'll be taken care of ceremoniously.
Right. You're also, as you mentioned earlier, you're on the Veterans Coordinating Council for
Yes, sir.
Rockland County?
I coordinate all the activities: Memorial Day, Veteran of the Year, the POW MIA program, and I set up the agenda for the coordinating council.
Mm-hmm. And if there's a vet out there that's watching this, or their family, and the vet needs help, how can they best find a way to get some assistance?
Well, the best way to do initially, and I work with Susan Branham, who's in the Rockland County Veterans Service Agency right here on Squadron Boulevard in New City. The best thing to do is touch base right there first. Now, if they need any special help, she will direct it. If it's for me to help them as disabled veterans, I will. If they're handicapped and need that help, or if they need to get into the system, especially the healthcare system and that sort of thing. So the Veterans Service Agency is the first stop in the process. And then we're all sort of fishlands of the program.
Right. So, Jeremy, I want to thank you so much again for being such a wonderful guest. And thank you for your service to our country. And again, that service took a toll on you, but you've carried yourself with dignity and with grace, and you really are an example for other vets. And I know from other guests that we've had on the show that are vets who've interacted with you in your various roles, that you clearly have been an example for a lot of different folks within the veterans community. So thank you for being such a wonderful guest. And
if I may say one other thing,
Sure.
we're trying to build up the Veterans Coordinating Councils. As I say, we have 8 agencies. There is an agency I'd like to get in, the Air Force Association, which is a nationally certified veterans organization. And also, it's not strong in Rockland County yet, but the Gulf War, the OEF group, we'd like to get them in. So any veterans who are listening to this from either of those categories, we welcome them to attend. We meet once a month at 7 o'clock on the first Wednesday of the month at Kearsing Edwards American Legion Post in Pomona, and we greatly welcome them to join.
Great.
And I thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. So our next guest, please stay tuned for our next guest, Justin Sweet, the Clarkstown Town Clerk.